It's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hi, I'm Ivy Slater. Welcome to today's episode of Her Success Story. For those of you who are just listening in, you're joining us at an amazing time, one of my favorite times of the year. For those repeat listeners, thank you for joining. You know this is special. This is when we do our nonprofit series. We host a nonprofit series. It's our 6th year from Thanksgiving through New Year's. And as many nonprofit leaders and organizations we can highlight, we truly are committed to doing so. Why? Because the holidays for me personally are about giving and receiving. And if we can learn about more ways to give, sometimes that's financial, sometimes that's just showing up, then we all will be better people and a better society. So let me introduce you to my amazing guest today. Celeste Mergens is the founder of an organization called Days for Girls International. It's a global award-winning organization that reached more than 3 million women and girls in 145 countries. It helps people to see their strengths, trust their resilience, bridge the difficulties and divides, and lean in to build a brighter future together. I'm going to ask Celeste to share more about the organization. But before I do that, let me just tell you, she has a brand new book out, which is really amazing. It's The Power of Days. It's being brought to you by Ben Bella Books through Penguin Random House. So Celeste, thank you so much for joining me today.
Such a delight to be with you.
So you're not just involved in Days for Girls, you're actually the founder. So where did this start from? Let's go back to the beginning.
I had been volunteering in Kenya with a friend's family foundation and had been introduced to an orphanage while there, and soon learned, or later learned, that they were sitting on pieces of cardboard for days during their periods, no access to the classroom, no access to caring for themselves, and was shocked to learn that. And it turned out that because they didn't have what they needed, they were being exploited in exchange for a single disposable pad. And that for me was the moment Days for Girls was born.
So this organization is really dedicated to women and girls who are in areas in this world that cannot have access to the needs and supplies they need during their menstrual cycles.
Absolutely. And to education that shatters the stigma of shame that is all around it. It's one of the world's most prevalent taboos. And honestly, where you and I live, people would rather talk about almost anything than periods, though it connects us all. And who would have guessed that something so simple would be so global? 145 countries. That's how global this issue is. And it's not just somewhere else. Girls right wherever you are in the world, right where you are, have need of these supplies and often struggle to have access to what they need. What does a homeless person do? What does a girl that's a foster girl do? What does someone choosing between fuel in their tank to go to the next job interview and a pad choose? And the answer is often they use things that are difficult and take the choice that helps them meet basic needs that don't include this truly pivotal need being fulfilled. And we get to change that together all over the world.
So I remember you had shared a story with me of seeing a girl sitting on a piece of cardboard. Would you share that today? Because when you shared it with me when we first started getting to know each other, it hit a piece of my heart of thinking about myself when I first got my period, thinking about my daughter when she first got hers. And to think about, so can you share a little bit about that story?
Well, and I'd love to share with you one of the stories of one of those that serves with us as an enterprise leader with Days for Girls now. Her name's Alice. And when she first got her period, she didn't have what she needed. And she was in the classroom. She was one of their brightest. She was invited to come to the chalkboard and to, do a calculation, and instead sat there knowing she had a stain. Her teacher came up to her and slapped her and shamed her. And she ended up turning her skirt around at the end of the day, covering it with a book, and in the future trying to use pages of her journal or her notebook, pages of her text, pages of or grass or stuffing from her mattress, anything to try to stay in class, because she is one of the brightest. And not having what she need held her back from opportunities. And so that's why she's such a huge advocate of Days for Girls today. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about Days for Girls. We're not focused on the shame, or even there are people that die because she doesn't have what she needs. And in Chowpatty in Western Nepal and all over the world, we focus on how truly this is something we can change in the world, and that together we can actually change this for good.
So how long ago did you start this up?
15 years ago. November
Yeah.
1st will be 15 years. And it's flown by so fast, because when you love what you're doing, when you see the impact of what you're doing, it becomes your purpose and it lifts you instead of being something you have to drag along behind you.
So when you first got this idea,
Mm-hmm.
you were doing some traveling and some work in Kenya at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so tell me, how did you start this up? You saw the problem. The problem was apparent. It came to you.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you go? Because sometimes people see things, they're like, I don't even know where to begin. And you've built an organization that's touched millions in 145 countries. So where did you begin and how did that start?
For me, we had 3.5 weeks before we were returning to Kenya again. We were addressing many difficulties because of social unrest there that had disrupted and displaced 500,000 people. And now we're learning that this was an issue. And I've had people say, why didn't you just wait until the next time and not hurry to create a solution? But how can you leave people in their rooms? There was no wait till next time for me. So thankfully, I believe in rallying people together. And we were able to rally people from churches and people from service organizations to get together and sew in just 3.5 weeks. So that's amazing. We were able to make 500 of the first washable kits that we make, because for me, you could do a one-time solution, but what about next month? So immediately I knew, in part because of the gift of being raised in poverty, I knew having what you need and is not something everyone can count on. And so we made washable solutions. People rallied in the most beautiful ways. And some of them questions that this could be even an issue outside of the orphanage I was helping. But we kept inviting them to ask elsewhere, what do you see? Ask other people if they have this issue. And soon we got word from India and Guatemala and all over the world that they needed this solution as well. We made it at the beginning open source, made it so that come on in, be part of this movement. And from the beginning, that was important to me, the invitation for people to come together to change lives with their own two hands and with their own advocacy.
So where is the organization today, 15 years later? And how do you run this?
We have volunteers all over the planet. We have a running count of over 70,000 that have participated. And one of the important things from pretty early on was to make the resources available in one place. In our case, is on a drive, Google Drive, and so that people and directed through one portal of leadership. In other words, if you just send things out in emails, pretty soon there's a big tangle of communication. So we early on tried to create systems that would scale so that as we grew, we didn't have to reinvent over and over. I learned that the hard way. And in addition, today, we continue to have people leading from all over the planet, not just in one place. In fact, we do not even have an office. It's a virtual office, except for supply stations in various places around the world. We have Days for Girls UK, Days for Girls Canada, Days for Girls New Zealand and Australia and USA. And it's about communication. That's been important. Today, I actually, about a year ago, stepped down from being the global CEO and embarrassingly have to confess 18-hour days to being able to focus on promoting and completing the book, The Power of Days, about the journey so that more people can find out about it, and trusting an incredible woman, Tiffany Larson, to be the CEO who's worked with me for years. And that was possible because from pretty early on, about 2010, 2 years in, I recognized that if we were going to do this, we needed playbooks for individual positions, we needed clear roles, and we needed to be able to make it so people knew what they were holding. And recording action steps for best practices and our historic steps of lessons failing forward and moving forward were important parts of the process of my leadership. So from the beginning, I knew that this wasn't about the power of me, it was the power of we and what happens when we all come together.
So share a little bit about your background. How did you know to get this all on a Google Drive at the time? So where was your knowledge base? What was your background?
I've had a lot of different leadership opportunities, and I have 6 children, 4 foreign exchange students and 4 foster kids in the family. And I had to learn that if you want to do anything but laundry, you have to make a plan.
Love that.
And you also have to be tenaciously flexible. In other words, make a plan, but be ready for it to change. So I got to master that. And I also recognize that my background is I studied electrical engineering for a little while. I've done business for many years. And I recognize that if you want someone to be able to hold something, you have to be able to define it. And so I had founded a writers' conference years ago. And step 2, after deciding what it would be, was making playbooks for 22 individual positions, and then inviting people to come and choose a notebook and describe our shared goal together. And to build the organization of this writers' conference, that became one of the most successful in the US within just 2 to 3 years. I knew that it has to be about the power of a team, not just the power of one. And that's actually the joy of building a business or an organization, is recognizing it doesn't become a movement until you're courageous enough to pass it on.
Where do you see, or in your vision, where do you see Days for Girls going in the next 10? Because you've accomplished so much and there's always more work to be done.
Mm-hmm. Right now, there's so much collaboration with governments and other organizations. It's really beautiful to watch. When Days for Girls started, there weren't a lot of people talking about this. There just weren't. And today, there are so many talking about that. And we're really so pleased to have governments like the country Cambodia has the Ministry of Education, Health, and Sports working together to replicate Days for Girls throughout the country with all teachers. That's amazing.
Beautiful.
And
that's amazing. Right? That is amazing.
Yes. And that happens when you trust networks to pull together and keep leaning in and inviting. And so more of that, more opportunities and collaboration, more recognizing me personally. Mine is that recognizing there are a lot of things that are hard to change in the world, but menstrual equity and shattering the stigma and shame is something you and I can do personally in our lifetimes, just as surely as the suffragette movement happened. There was a time people thought women shouldn't vote. What? And there was a time that people thought periods were something you shouldn't talk about. We get to change that in our lifetime. And it turns out that's about a whole lot more than an embarrassing conversation shifted. That's about dignity, health, opportunity, and equity.
What has surprised you in this journey of building this organization, Days for Girls, and you've spent years on the road traveling and meeting and learning. What has been like that surprise moment for you?
I would say how much we have in common. People would say, oh, you have to have separate curriculums. You have to, and we do have a little of that. But truthfully, I have 3 passports full of proof that what we have in common is so much more than what we don't. And that it is so beautiful to hear people out and hear their thoughts and perspectives. Can I share with you one that was like a moment?
Absolutely.
I was in Nepal. We were walking along the edge of a mountainside, and I'm telling you, I promise, 1,000-foot drop minimum from where we were dropping, and it's just straight off. And I'm trying to focus ahead so I don't get fearful of this. And the woman in front, and I tell the woman in front of me, these mountains are so beautiful. And she says, "Oh, these are not mountains; these are hills." And I'm like, "Oh, trust me." I live near Mount Rainier in Washington State, and this hillside, quote unquote, I was walking on, did just really out vastness the Mount Rainier. And so I was like, wow, but I knew better than to correct her. As we were flying out, I took a photo outside the mirror, excuse me. I took a photo outside the airplane window,
Right.
and there was pictures. I'm in the picture. You can see the hills that we were walking along, and then cloud cover, and above that Mount Rainier, and above that Mount Everest.
Oh
When
my
you
gosh.
live in the neighborhood of
That's
Everest,
that's a mountain.
right? That's a mountain. And
That's a mountain.
we all walk different mountains.
Yeah.
We see things differently, we experience. And if you do not allow yourself to say, what do you see? Then you miss mountains you will never understand. And that has been a huge aha for me all over this world. And that's why Days for Girls, really, our designs, our curriculum are all crowdsourced. They're built with input and response. And you cannot do that unless you are willing to fail forward, unless you're willing to be tenaciously flexible and lean into best practices. And you don't even recognize that's important unless you recognize we all see different mountains.
I love that. Celeste, you are always a joy to talk to. And most importantly, there's so much to learn. There's so much to learn. I encourage everybody to pick up the book, download the book, pick up the book, however you work. Read it on your phone, read it on your tablet, whatever it is. But in looking at and understanding as women, the importance of having our needs met during the times of our period. Every person that I know has that thought, that story in of themselves of when they were shamed or embarrassed in that moment. As we bled through something in school or whatever it is, when you take that to a level of, we still had supplies, and there's young women and women out there, and young women and young girls who don't. And if we could make a difference there, it's important. So thank you for coming on today and sharing Days for Girls.
So good to be with you, Ivy.
And listeners, this is what I say at every time. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. It's an important conversation, especially for a podcast that has the majority of women listeners. Not all. Thank you guys for tuning in. Take a moment and think about what your takeaway is today. What was most helpful? What was most impactful? And then make a decision and create an action for yourself of what you're going to do about it. Because it's in those moments that we know we all have the ability to make a difference. Thank you for joining me here today. Please feel free to leave a response, a comment on today's episode, share it forward with others in your community. Please do that for the entire nonprofit series. I don't push this often. I'm pushing it for the nonprofit series. And see you next time.